Rosa Chun had catered diplomatic functions before, but never one where half the guests had tentacles and the other half communicated through color-changing skin patterns. The Interspecies Trade Summit on Orbital Station Geneva was supposed to be routine a 3-day conference to negotiate mining rights in the outer colonies, with Rosa providing meals for the 37 delegate species attending. She'd been cooking for alien palates for 8 years now, ever since humanity joined the Galactic Trade Consortium. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and Rosa had developed a reputation for being able to feed anyone anything without causing diplomatic incidents or accidental poisonings. Chef Chun, her assistant Marcus, called from across the station's main kitchen. The Vecthari delegation wants to confirm that their meals contain no compounds that register above 2.3 on the molecular sensitivity scale. Rosa checked her notes while stirring a pot of what she privately called alien-safe stew, a nutritionally balanced mixture of proteins and carbohydrates that had been tested safe for consumption by 74 different species. It was bland, boring, and completely inoffensive. Tell them it's all standard Federation-approved neutral cuisine, she called back. Nothing that could trigger allergic reactions or cause cultural offense. That was the key to interspecies catering. Keep everything safe, simple, and forgettable. Don't experiment. Don't add personality. Just provide fuel to keep the diplomats functioning while they argued over trade routes and resource allocation. Rosa had learned this lesson the hard way during her first off-world contract, when she'd nearly caused an interplanetary incident. By serving Zephyrian delegates a soup that reminded them of their recently deceased spiritual leader. The fact that it was accidental didn't matter. She'd spent 3 days locked in a holding cell while cultural attaches worked out whether she'd committed blasphemy or just made an unfortunate seasoning choice. Since then, Rosa stuck to the approved menus and avoided anything that might be misinterpreted. But as she watched the diplomatic delegates filtering into the station's main dining hall for the opening reception, Rosa couldn't help feeling a familiar itch of curiosity. Each species had such distinctive physiologies, such unique dietary requirements, and cultural food traditions. The Christites literally consumed light energy and mineral supplements. The hegemony representatives appeared to subsist entirely on a nutrient paste that looked like metallic pudding. The Kefani seemed to prefer everything served at exactly room temperature, with no seasoning whatsoever. It was, from a culinary perspective, fascinating and deeply frustrating. Rosa was ladling out portions of alien-safe stew when she noticed one of the delegates wasn't eating. A small, furry creature with large eyes and delicate hands sat at the Andromedian Coalition table, staring at the bowl in front of her with what Rosa had learned to recognize as polite distress. Delegate according to Rosa's briefing materials. Ambassador Kiri of the Fulani people had been picking at her food for the past 10 minutes without taking a single bite. Her colleagues were eating with the mechanical efficiency of beings fueling their bodies for important work. But Ambassador Kiri looked sad. Rosa had seen that expression before. It was the look of someone who was homesick, missing the comfort, foods of their childhood, trying to be polite about eating something that had no emotional resonance whatsoever. It was also none of Rosa's business. Her job was to provide safe, approved nutrition, not to worry about whether the diplomats were enjoying their meals. But as Rosa watched Ambassador Kiri continue to stare at her untouched bowl, she found herself remembering her own grandmother's kitchen, the way Abuela's arroz con palo could make any bad day better. The smell of fresh tortillas that meant home and family and being understood without having to explain anything. Food wasn't just nutrition. It was comfort, memory, connection, love. Rosa was still watching Ambassador Kiri when Marcus appeared at her elbow. "Chef, we've got a problem. The hegemony delegates are complaining that their nutrient paste isn't the right consistency. They're saying it's an insult to their cultural standards. Rosa sighed. What consistency are they expecting? More viscous. Apparently, thin nutrient paste implies that we think they're juveniles who can't handle adult food. Rosa looked around. The dining hall, where 37 species were mechanically consuming approved, safe, culturally neutral meals while conducting the important business of interspecies diplomacy. No one looked happy. No one looked satisfied. They were all just eating fuel to keep their bodies running, while their minds focused on trade negotiations. It was efficient. It was safe. It was completely soul-crushing. Marcus, Rosa said quietly, how much creative latitude do we have with tomorrow's menu? Marcus blinked in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, what if we tried actually cooking for these people, instead of just feeding them? Chef, the approved menu guidelines are very specific. Any deviation could cause... I know what it could cause. But look around. These beings are trying to build relationships, negotiate agreements, create trust between their species. And we're serving them flavorless protein paste and calling it hospitality. Rosa watched as Ambassador Kiri finally took a small, dutiful bite of her stew, chewed it without enthusiasm, and set her spoon down with the resigned expression of someone who had given up hope of enjoying a meal. Marcus, get me the complete dietary restriction files for all the delegate species. Not just the approved safe lists, everything. Nutritional requirements, cultural preferences, traditional foods, the works. Chef, if you're thinking about experimenting with the menu, I'm thinking about doing my job properly for once. Rosa had spent 8 years playing it safe, avoiding risks, keeping her creativity locked away behind Federation guidelines and approved ingredient lists. But watching Ambassador Kiri's quiet disappointment, she realized that safety wasn't the same thing as hospitality. And if these diplomats were going to spend 3 days trying to build bridges between their civilizations, the least Rosa could do was give them something worth sharing a meal over. Rosa spent the rest of the evening in her quarters, surrounded by data pads containing more information about interspecies nutrition than she'd ever seen in one place. The official Federation dietary guidelines were comprehensive but conservative, focused entirely on avoiding harmful reactions rather than creating positive experiences. But buried in the cultural attachments and anthropological surveys were hints of something much more interesting: the foods that each species actually enjoyed. The Fulani, Ambassador Kiri's people, were originally forest dwellers who had developed a cuisine based around nuts, fruits, and slow-cooked grains that could simmer over campfires during long migrations. Their traditional dishes emphasized layered flavors that built complexity over time, with spice combinations that were supposed to tell stories about the changing seasons. The Christites might consume light, energy as their primary nutrition source, but they also had a cultural tradition of flavor enhancers, mineral compounds that didn't provide calories but created taste experiences that were central to their social bonding rituals. Even the seemingly austere Kethani had preferences. Their homeworld's climate had led to a cuisine of subtle temperature variations and delicate textures, where the art was in creating contrast through warmth and coolness rather than through seasoning. Rosa was making notes when Marcus knocked on her door. Chef, I brought the complete dietary files you requested. Also, you should know that 3 more delegate species have sent formal complaints about tonight's dinner. The Zephyrians said it was nutritionally adequate, but culturally vacant. The Vorthik delegation used a phrase that roughly translates to food for prisoners. Rosa looked up from her research. What did the hegemony representatives say after we fixed their nutrient paste consistency? They said it was acceptably thick, but they wanted to know why we assumed they didn't deserve flavor enhancement. Apparently, we missed the fact that hegemony nutrient paste is traditionally infused with aromatic compounds that indicate social status and regional identity. So everyone's politely telling us that our food is terrible. In diplomatic terms, yes. Rosa rubbed her temples. Marcus, what's the worst that could happen if I deviated from the approved menu? Worst case? Accidental poisoning, cultural offense, leading to diplomatic crisis, possible criminal charges for reckless endangerment of interspecies relations. And what's the worst that could happen if I don't? Marcus was quiet for a moment. These delegates spend the next 3 days eating food that makes them miserable while trying to negotiate agreements that will affect billions of lives. They associate humanity with bland, thoughtless hospitality. The summit fails because no one could build the personal connections necessary for trust. Rosa nodded. So either way, we risk disaster. The question is whether we risk disaster while trying to do something meaningful or risk disaster while playing it safe. Chef, are you seriously considering ignoring 8 years of Federation dietary safety protocols? Rosa looked at her research notes, thinking about Ambassador Kiri's untouched bowl and the resigned expressions of beings who are trying to build bridges between civilizations while eating food that tasted like nutritional cardboard. Marcus, I'm considering being a chef instead of a food service technician. There's a difference. Over the next 4 hours, Rosa and Marcus worked through the dietary requirements and cultural food traditions of all 37 delegate species. The challenge wasn't just creating dishes that would be safe for each species to consume. It was creating dishes that would be meaningful. The Falani needed foods that told stories through layered flavors. The Christites needed mineral enhancers that would create shared taste experiences. The Kethani needed subtle temperature and texture contrasts. The hegemony representatives needed aromatic complexity that reflected their social structures. And Rosa needed to create all of this using ingredients and techniques that wouldn't accidentally poison anyone or cause interplanetary incidents. This is insane, Marcus said as Rosa sketched out menu ideas. You're talking about preparing 37 different culturally appropriate meals for species we've barely interacted with, using ingredients we've never cooked with, based on anthropological data that might be completely wrong. Yes, and if you get it wrong, you could kill someone or start a war. Also, yes, Marcus stared at Rosa's notes. So why are we doing this? Rosa thought about her grandmother's kitchen, about the way food could communicate love and respect and understanding, without a single word being spoken. She thought about Ambassador Kiri's sad expression and the mechanical way all the delegates had consumed their safe, approved nutrition. Because food is the first diplomacy, she said. Before you negotiate trade agreements or defense pacts, you share a meal. You show that you care enough about someone to understand what nourishes them, what brings them comfort, what makes them feel welcomed and respected. And you think the Federation Diplomatic Corps missed that? I think the Federation Diplomatic Corps is very good at avoiding problems. But avoiding problems isn't the same thing as creating solutions. Rosa pulled up the cultural files on her datapad, looking at images of traditional Felani feast preparations, Christite flavor ceremonies, Kethani temperature contrast presentations. Marcus, these people didn't travel halfway across the galaxy to eat protein paste in a sterile conference room. They came here to build relationships. And relationships are built around tables where people share food that matters to them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking at Rosa's increasingly complex menu plans. Chef, if we're going to do this, we'll need help and ingredients, and probably medical clearance for every dish. Can you get what we need? Maybe. But Rosa, if this goes wrong, we're not just risking our careers. We're risking the entire summit. Rosa looked at her notes, at the careful balance of nutritional requirements and cultural significance she was trying to create. It was complex, risky, and completely outside the bounds of anything she'd ever attempted. It was also the most important cooking she'd ever done. Marcus, get me everything we need. Tomorrow, these delegates are going to experience human hospitality. the way it's supposed to be done. By 0600 hours the next morning, Rosa's kitchen had been transformed into something resembling a xenobiological laboratory, crossed with a high-end restaurant prep area. Marcus had somehow procured ingredients from 17 different sectors, specialized cooking equipment for temperature-sensitive preparations, and enough monitoring devices to track the molecular composition of everything they were creating. The Fulani spice blend ingredients arrived this morning, Marcus reported, checking items off a massive inventory list. The trader who sold them to me said this combination hasn't been prepared off-world before, so we're in uncharted territory. Rosa examined the containers of what looked like seeds, dried fruits, and crystalline substances, each labeled with detailed molecular analyses. What about the crystite mineral enhancers? Those were expensive. Apparently, the compounds we need are usually synthesized on their homeworld using specialized equipment. I had to buy raw materials and jury-rig a synthesis chamber using parts from the station's chemistry lab. Rosa raised an eyebrow. Please tell me you got permission for that. I got permission to acquire necessary ingredients for diplomatic meal preparation. The station commander didn't ask for details. The kitchen was organized in different stations, each dedicated to the specific requirements of different delegate species. Rosa had spent hours studying preparation techniques, traditional cooking methods, and cultural significance of various foods until she felt like her head would explode from information overload. But she was also more excited about cooking than she'd been in years. Chef, Marcus called from the mineral synthesis station. We've got our first success. The crystite flavor enhancers are testing within acceptable parameters. Rosa tasted the result of powder that had no nutritional value, but created an experience like tasting starlight mixed with mountain air. It was unlike anything in human cuisine, but Rosa could understand how it might create the shared sensory experience that was central to crystite social bonding. That's beautiful, she said. What about the Kethani temperature variations? Still working on that. Turns out creating foods that maintain 6 different temperature zones simultaneously is more complicated than the cultural text suggested. Rosa moved between stations, testing flavors and adjusting preparations. The Fulani spice blend was building complexity exactly as the traditional recipes described individual flavors appearing and fading in sequence to create what the anthropological texts called a story of tastes. The hegemony aromatic compounds were producing scent profiles that Rosa's human nose couldn't fully appreciate, but the chemical analysis confirmed they were creating the layered complexity that indicated cultural sophistication in hegemony society. Even the seemingly simple Vorthak grain preparation was revealing unexpected subtleties as Rosa learned to work with ingredients that had different molecular structures than anything from Earth. This is incredible, Rosa said to Marcus as she sampled a Zephyrian harmony dish that was supposed to create flavor combinations that reflected their musical communication style. Every species has developed such sophisticated approaches to food. We've been treating them like they just needed fuel, instead of recognizing that they have entire culinary cultures. Speaking of which, Marcus said, Ambassador Curie sent a personal message asking if tonight's dinner would be similar in character to last night's meal. I think that was a polite way of asking if she should eat something else before coming to dinner. Rosa looked at the Fulani preparation. She'd been working on a slow-cooked grain dish with layers of the traditional spice blend, designed to tell the story of seasonal changes on their forest homeworld. It was complex, time-consuming, and completely different from anything in the Federation. Approved meal guidelines. Was also exactly the kind of food that might make Ambassador Curie feel welcomed and understood instead of just adequately nourished. Tell Ambassador Curie that tonight's dinner will be different. And Marcus, send the same message to all the delegates. Let them know that we're preparing traditional dishes from their homeworlds and we hope they'll join us for a meal that honors their cultures. Marcus paused in his work. Chef, you realize that message is essentially a promise to 37 different species that we understand their food traditions well enough to recreate them? Yes, and if we get any of it wrong, we'll be causing offense to diplomatic representatives who are here to negotiate agreements that affect galactic trade. Also, yes, just checking. Rosa spent the rest of the day immersed in preparations that pushed every skill she'd developed over 8 years of interspecies cooking. Each dish required not just technical precision, but cultural understanding. She wasn't just combining ingredients, she was trying to communicate respect, welcome, and genuine interest in each species' traditions. By 1700 hours, the kitchen smelled like 37 different worlds. Rosa was exhausted, stressed, and more nervous than she'd ever been before a service. She was also certain that they were about to serve the most meaningful meal of her career. Chef, Marcus said as they began plating the first courses. Whatever happens tonight, this has been the most interesting cooking I've ever been part of. Rosa looked around the kitchen at the complex array of dishes representing cultures from across the galaxy, each one prepared with as much care and attention as she'd ever devoted to any meal. Marcus, we're about to find out whether food can actually build bridges between civilizations. No pressure, right? Rosa smiled as she put the finishing touches on Ambassador Kiri's traditional Felani feast plate. None at all. The dining hall had been transformed. Instead of the efficient but sterile conference setup from the previous evening, Rosa had worked with the station staff to create an arrangement that encouraged interaction. Smaller tables mixed delegates from different species with seating, designed to accommodate various physiologies while promoting conversation. As the 37 delegates entered the dining hall, Rosa watched the reactions from the service area. The first thing they noticed was the aroma, not the neutral, inoffensive scent of Federation-approved cuisine, but the complex, layered fragrances of traditional dishes from their homeworlds. Ambassador Kiri stopped just inside the entrance, her large eyes widening as she caught the scent of Felani spice blends. Her delicate nostrils flared, and Rosa could see recognition and surprise across her features. The Christite delegates immediately began the color-shifting communication patterns that Rosa had learned indicated excitement or curiosity. The hegemony representatives were actually sniffing the air, something Rosa had never seen them do during previous diplomatic functions. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings, Rosa announced as the delegates took their seats. Tonight's meal represents our attempt to honor the culinary traditions of your homeworlds. Each dish has been prepared using traditional methods and ingredients, adapted for safety, while maintaining cultural authenticity. A murmur of surprise rippled through the dining hall. Rosa could see delegates exchanging glances, some skeptical, some curious, all clearly unprepared for anything other than the standard diplomatic fare they'd come to expect at interspecies functions. We hope, Rosa continued, that these foods will provide not just nutrition, but comfort, connection, and a taste of home during your important work here. Rosa and Marcus began service, presenting each delegate with dishes specific to their species' traditions. The Felani received their storytelling spice preparations. The Christites got mineral enhancers designed for shared taste experiences. The Kethani were served temperature contrast presentations that reflected their subtle culinary philosophy. Ambassador Kiri was among the first to taste her meal. Rosa watched as the small Felani took a careful bite of the traditional grain preparation, her expression shifting from polite wariness to genuine surprise to something that looked almost like tears. Ambassador Kiri took another bite, then another, her movements becoming less cautious and more eager. She began eating with the kind of focused attention Rosa recognized, the way people ate food that meant something to them. At the Christite table, the mineral enhancers were producing the intended effect. The three Christite delegates were sharing portions of their dishes, their skin patterns shifting through synchronized color sequences that Rosa had learned indicated the kind of social bonding their species valued. The hegemony representatives were examining their aromatic compounds with what appeared to be genuine interest, discussing the scent profiles with the kind of technical appreciation that Rosa had hoped to achieve. But it was the cross-species interactions that surprised Rosa most. Ambassador Curie, emboldened by her own positive experience, began explaining. The cultural significance of Fulani spice blends to the Kethani delegate at her table. The Kethani, in turn, offered to share a portion of his temperature contrast presentation, describing the philosophy behind thermal cooking techniques. The Christites were inviting other delegates to experience their mineral enhancers, creating impromptu taste-sharing sessions that crossed species boundaries. Even the usually formal hegemony representatives were discussing their aromatic traditions with delegates from other species, explaining the social significance of scent combinations. In their culture, Marcus, Rosa said quietly, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? You mean delegates from 37 different species, actually talking to each other about something other than trade regulations? That's exactly what I mean." The meal continued for over 2 hours, far longer than any previous diplomatic dinner. Delegates were moving between tables, sharing dishes, asking questions about each other's food traditions, and engaging in the kind of personal, cultural exchange that formal negotiations rarely allowed. Rosa was observing from the service area when Ambassador Curie approached her. "Chef Chun," the small Filani said, her voice carrying harmonics that Rosa had learned indicated deep emotion. "I must ask, where did you learn to prepare traditional Filani cuisine?" Rosa felt her stomach tighten. This was the moment when her improvisation could be exposed, when Ambassador Curie might realize that Rosa had been working from anthropological texts rather than actual culinary training. "I studied your cultural food traditions, Ambassador. I wanted to understand not just what would be safe for you to eat, but what would be meaningful." Ambassador Curie was quiet for a moment. "Chef Chun, this meal, these flavors tell the story of seasonal change on my homeworld. The way the spices build and fade, the progression of tastes, this is exactly how my grandmother prepared feast. Meals when I was a child." Rosa felt relief wash over her. "I'm glad it brought back good memories." "More than that," Ambassador Curie said, "this meal tells me that humans understand something that many species do not, that food is about more than nutrition. It is about memory, connection, respect. You have shown respect for my culture in a way that no off-world chef has ever attempted." Rosa looked around the dining hall, where delegates were still engaged in animated conversations about food, culture, and the traditions of their homeworlds. "Ambassador, I think food might be the best diplomacy we have. Before you can trust someone with your political future, you need to trust them to understand something as personal as what makes you feel at home." Ambassador Curie nodded. "Chef Chun, I would like to make a proposal. Tomorrow, would you be willing to prepare a collaborative meal? Something that combines elements from multiple species traditions?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, let us create something new together. Let each delegation contribute ingredients or techniques from their homeworld, and let you combine them into dishes that have never existed before. Let us create fusion cuisine that represents not our separate cultures, but our ability to build something together." Rosa stared at Ambassador Curie, processing the implications of what she was suggesting. A collaborative meal, using techniques and ingredients from 37 different species, creating fusion dishes that would represent interspecies cooperation. Instead of separate cultural traditions, it was ambitious, risky, and completely unprecedented. It was also exactly the kind of challenge Rosa had become a chef to tackle. "Ambassador Curie," Rosa said, "I would be honored to attempt such a meal." Ambassador Curie's expression brightened. Excellent. I will speak with the other delegates. I believe they will be very interested in this opportunity. As Ambassador Curie returned to her table to discuss the proposal with other delegates, Rosa turned to Marcus. Did I just agree to invent interspecies fusion cuisine for 37 different diplomatic delegations? Yes, you did. And do we have any idea how to do that? None whatsoever. Rosa looked around the dining hall at delegates who were still sharing food and stories, building personal connections that transcended formal diplomatic protocols. Marcus, get me everything we'll need for tomorrow. We're about to attempt something that's never been done before. What's that? We're going to cook Unity. The next morning, Rosa's kitchen looked like the aftermath of an explosion in a xenobiological supply depot. Ingredients, cooking implements, and preparation techniques from 37 different worlds were spread across every available surface, while Rosa tried to figure out how to combine them into something coherent. The good news, Marcus reported, is that all 37 delegations are enthusiastic about the fusion meal concept. The challenging news is that they've each provided traditional ingredients and suggested preparation methods. And some of these combinations are theoretically impossible. Rosa examined a collection of ingredients that included Felani story spices, Christite mineral enhancers, Kefani thermal contrast elements, Hegemony aromatic compounds, and substances from 33 other species that she couldn't even identify. Define. Theoretically impossible. Well, the Theraxian delegates provided enzymes that break down proteins at the molecular level. The Vorthic delegation contributed binding agents that are designed to hold proteins together under extreme pressure. Using both in the same dish would essentially create a food that digests itself. Rosa nodded. What else? The Zephyrian Harmony ingredients are designed to create synchronized taste experiences. The Chaotic Entropy delegates provided flavor, compounds that are specifically engineered to create maximum taste variation and unpredictability. Combining them would be like trying to play a symphony and free-form jazz simultaneously. Anything else I should know about? Marcus consulted his notes. The temperature requirements alone are incompatible. We have ingredients that need to be served at near-freezing temperatures next to ones that require active thermal heating. Some of the mineral compounds will neutralize each other if they come into contact. And at least 6 different species provided ingredients that would be toxic to 10 other species if prepared incorrectly. Rosa stared at the chaos of ingredients, trying to see patterns or possibilities instead of just impossibilities. Marcus, what if we're thinking about this wrong? What do you mean? What if fusion doesn't mean putting everything together in the same dish? What if it means creating a meal where each element complements the others, even if they remain separate? Rosa began sorting ingredients not by species of origin, but by function and flavor profile. Spices that created layered complexity, minerals that enhanced shared experiences, temperature elements that provided contrast, aromatic compounds that established atmosphere. Look at this, she said, arranging ingredients into groups. The Felani spices and the Hegemony aromatics both create progressive flavor experiences. They just work on different senses. What if we combine them to create dishes that tell stories through both taste and scent? Marcus examined Rosa's arrangement, and the Christite mineral enhancers could bridge the gap between species that experience flavor differently. Create a common sensory foundation that everyone can share. Exactly. And the thermal elements, instead of trying to combine incompatible temperatures, we create temperature sequences. Dishes that move through different thermal experiences as part of the meal progression. Rosa was beginning to see the shape of something unprecedented, not just fusion cuisine, but fusion dining. An experience that would allow 37 different species to share a meal that honored their individual traditions while creating something entirely new. This is going to require precise timing, Rosa said, sketching out a service sequence. Each course needs to build on the previous ones, creating layers of shared experience that culminate in something none of these species has ever tasted before. If it doesn't work, Rosa looked around the kitchen at ingredients from worlds she'd never seen, representing culinary traditions she was only beginning to understand. If it doesn't work, we'll have attempted something beautiful and failed spectacularly. If it does work, we'll have created something that proves different. Species can build something together that's better than what any of them could create. Alone, Rosa spent the next 6 hours developing preparation techniques that had never existed before. Spice blends that incorporated elements from multiple worlds. Mineral enhancement systems that could create shared sensory experiences across species barriers. Temperature progression sequences that told thermal stories. The most challenging aspect was creating dishes that would be meaningful to every delegate while remaining safe for consumption. Each fusion creation needed to respect the dietary restrictions and cultural preferences of 37 different species while pushing the boundaries of what any of them considered familiar. By 1500 hours, Rosa had developed what she privately called Impossible Fusion. 5 courses that would take delegates on a culinary journey from their individual homeworld traditions to completely new taste experiences that could only exist through interspecies collaboration. Marcus, she said as they began final preparations, what we're about to attempt has never been done before in galactic history. No pressure, right? Rosa smiled as she put the finishing touches on the first fusion course, a dish that combined Falani storytelling spices with crystite, mineral enhancers, and Cathani thermal techniques to create something that was recognizable to each species, but completely new to all of them. None at all. We're just trying to prove that the impossible is possible. Through food? Through food. The final dinner of the Interspecies Trade Summit began differently than any diplomatic meal Rosa had ever served. Instead of delegates sitting at separate tables organized by species, the dining hall had been arranged with a single large, circular table that accommodated all 37 delegates and their various physiological requirements. Esteemed delegates, Rosa announced, tonight's meal represents something that has never been attempted before. Fusion cuisine that combines elements from all of your homeworld, traditions into dishes that could only exist through collaboration. She paused, looking around the table at faces, skin patterns, and sensory organs representing dozens of different evolutionary paths. Each course will take you from familiar flavors to completely new experiences that we could only create by working together. We hope this meal will demonstrate that fusion in cuisine and in diplomacy can produce results that exceed what any of us could achieve alone. The first course was what Rosa called recognition, small portions that contained familiar elements from each species' traditional cuisine, but presented in combinations that created new complexity. Falani spices enhanced with crystite minerals, Cathani thermal techniques applied to hegemony aromatic bases, Zephyrian harmony principles combined with Vorthic grain preparations. Ambassador Kiri took the first taste, her expression shifting from recognition to surprise to delight as flavors she knew from childhood evolved into something she'd never experienced before. Around the table, delegates were having similar reactions. The familiar was becoming extraordinary through combination with elements from other cultures. This is remarkable, Ambassador Kiri said to the crystite delegate beside her. I can taste my grandmother's spice blend, but it's enhanced by your mineral techniques in a way that creates entirely new stories. The crystite skin patterns shifted to colors Rosa had learned indicated excitement, and the Cathani thermal progression adds temporal elements to the experience. We are not just tasting flavor, but experiencing the passage of time through temperature change. The second course, communication, focused on bridging the sensory differences between species. Rosa had developed techniques that allowed species with different sensory capabilities to share taste experiences. The Christite's mineral enhancers were combined with aromatic compounds that could be appreciated by scent-focused species, while thermal elements provided sensory information for species that experienced food through temperature variation. For the first time in the summit, Rosa watched as delegates began actively sharing portions of their food, explaining how the dishes tasted to their species, learning how other beings experienced the same flavors differently. Fascinating, the hegemony representative said, offering a portion of his dish to a Zephyrian delegate. For my species, this creates aromatic complexity that indicates social harmony. How does your species experience these flavors? The Zephyrian's response involved color-shifting skin patterns that Rosa had learned represented musical concepts. Through translation devices, the delegate explained that the same dish created taste harmonies that resembled their species' communication. Music. The third course, Innovation, presented combinations that no species had ever tasted before, flavors that could only exist through interspecies fusion. Rosa had pushed beyond familiar territory, creating taste experiences that were entirely new but built on principles that each species could appreciate. The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Delegates were not just eating, but experimenting, combining different elements of their dishes to create even more fusion possibilities. Chef Chun, Ambassador Kiri, called from her seat. These flavors, they do not exist in nature on any world, do they? No, Ambassador. They can only exist through artificial combination of elements from multiple worlds. They're tastes that could never develop through natural evolution, but can be created through intentional cooperation. A murmur of understanding passed around the table. Rosa realized that the delegates were grasping the metaphor that some of the most valuable things could only be achieved through collaboration that transcended natural boundaries. The fourth course, Synthesis, represented Rosa's most ambitious attempt at interspecies fusion. Each dish incorporated elements from at least 20 different worlds, creating flavor progressions that told stories of cooperation, combination, and mutual enhancement. The dining hall fell quiet as delegates focused on experiences that challenged their understanding of what food could be. Rosa watched as beings who had spent days negotiating trade agreements and resource allocation began to understand viscerally how different elements could be combined to create something greater than the sum of their parts. This is extraordinary, the Kethani delegate said, breaking the contemplative silence. These flavors require understanding and cooperation between multiple culinary traditions. No single species could create this experience alone, which suggests, Ambassador Kiri added thoughtfully, that there may be many valuable things that can only be achieved through interspecies cooperation, things we cannot even imagine until we attempt to create them together. Rosa felt her heart racing as she realized the delegates were making the connection she had hoped for. The fusion cuisine wasn't just about food, it was about demonstrating the potential for collaborative creation. The final course, Future, was Rosa's most ambitious creation. She had worked with ingredients and techniques from all 37 worlds to create a dish that was simultaneously familiar to every species and completely new to all of them. It was food that could only exist through the kind of complex cooperation. The Trade Summit was designed to foster that. As the delegates tasted the final course, Rosa watched their faces transform. Recognition, surprise, delight, and something else. A kind of wonder at experiencing something that represented perfect collaboration between cultures that had never worked together before. The meal concluded with delegates sitting in contemplative silence, processing not just the flavors they had experienced, but the implications of what they had shared. Ambassador Kiri was the first to speak. Chef Chun, this meal has demonstrated something I did not expect when I came to this summit. You have shown us that fusion, true collaboration between our species, can create things of extraordinary beauty and value that none of us could achieve alone. She looked around the table at her fellow delegates. I believe we should propose something unprecedented to our respective governments. Not just trade agreements or resource-sharing contracts, but cultural exchange programs. Programs that bring our species together, not just for business, but for the kind of meaningful collaboration that Chef Chun has demonstrated tonight. The Christite delegate's skin shifted to patterns Rosa had learned indicated enthusiasm. Such programs would require unprecedented trust and cooperation between our governments. Yes, Ambassador Curie agreed. And tonight we have tasted what such cooperation can produce. Rosa watched in amazement as the diplomatic conversation shifted from formal negotiations to genuine discussion of possibilities. The fusion meal had accomplished something that 3 days of official sessions had not. It had created personal connections and shared experiences that made abstract cooperation feel achievable. The Cathani delegate spoke carefully. If we were to propose such cultural exchange programs, we would need to demonstrate to our governments that meaningful collaboration is possible. Tonight's meal provides that demonstration. More than that, the hegemony representative added. Tonight's meal proves that fusion between our species can create value that exceeds what any of us could achieve individually. This is not just diplomatic theory, we have experienced it directly. Rosa felt tears building in her eyes as she realized what was happening. A simple decision to cook with respect and care was catalyzing discussions that could reshape interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Curie stood and addressed the entire table. Delegates, I propose that we adjourn our formal trade negotiations and reconvene tomorrow to discuss a different kind of agreement. An agreement for cultural exchange, collaborative creation, and the kind of fusion that Chef Chun has shown us. Tonight, the unanimous agreement was immediate and enthusiastic. 6 months later, Rosa Chun stood in the kitchen of the newly established Interspecies Cultural Center on Earth, training the first class of fusion cuisine specialists from 12 different worlds. The center was the result of the unprecedented cooperation agreements that had emerged from the trade summit agreements that had transformed routine commercial negotiations into the foundation for the most ambitious cultural exchange program in galactic history. The key to fusion cooking, Rosa explained to her multi-species class, isn't about combining everything together. It's about understanding what each ingredient brings to the experience and finding ways to let different elements enhance each other while maintaining their individual character. In the demonstration kitchen, students from various worlds were working on their first collaborative assignment, creating meals that incorporated techniques from at least 3 different species while remaining safe and meaningful for all participants. Falani student was teaching Christite classmates how to build flavor stories through spice progression. The Cathani instructor was demonstrating thermal techniques to students whose species had never conceived of temperature as a culinary element. Even the formal hegemony representative was enthusiastically discussing aromatic complexity with beings whose species communicated primarily through color changes. Chef Chun, Marcus said, appearing at her elbow with a communication pad. You've got a message from Ambassador Curie. She says the Cultural Exchange Council has approved funding for fusion cuisine programs on 47 different worlds. Rosa smiled, looking out at her classroom, where beings from across the galaxy were learning to cook together, share traditions, and create something new through collaboration. Marcus, do you remember what I said on the night we decided to deviate from the approved menu? You said food was the first diplomacy. And what do you think now? Marcus watched as a Zephyrian student successfully taught a group of Vorthic classmates how to create harmony flavors, their combined efforts producing taste experiences that none of their species had ever achieved individually. I think you were right, but I also think you understated the case. Marcus gestured at the classroom, full of beings from different worlds working together with genuine enthusiasm and mutual respect. Food isn't just diplomacy, it's transformation. It changes how people see each other, how they understand what's possible when they work together. Rosa nodded, thinking about the chain of events that had started with her decision to cook something meaningful for Ambassador Kiri, instead of serving another bowl of approved nutritional paste. You know what the best part is? What's that? None of this required special powers or advanced technology or dramatic heroism. It just required paying attention to what beings actually needed instead of what we assumed they needed, and being willing to take risks to provide it. Rosa returned to her teaching, helping students navigate the complex chemistry and cultural sensitivity required for successful fusion cuisine. But as she worked, she reflected on how much had changed since that first night when she decided to cook with care instead of just caution. The interspecies cultural center was just one result. Throughout the galaxy, the cooperation agreements that had emerged from the Trade Summit were fostering collaboration on scales that had never been attempted before. Joint research projects, cultural exchange programs, collaborative art initiatives, and fusion enterprises that combined the strengths of multiple species. And it had all started with one human chef, who decided that beings from across the galaxy deserved better than nutritionally adequate but culturally meaningless food. Rosa Chun, Director of Interspecies Culinary Arts and Cultural Integration, continued teaching students from 12 different worlds how to cook unity into every meal they prepared. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of work she'd always dreamed of doing.